have you arranged these seats deliberately to diminish me? Because I would have diminished myself very quickly anyway. You don't need to be the architect of my downfall. That's really interesting. Oh, you're giving me a cushion. Thank you, Scott. See, the people will rise up against tyranny in any of its forms, even when presented in the guise of a brilliant shamanic visionary presenting solutions to seemingly unsolvable problems around the globe, be they economic, spiritual, social or political. Thanks for that. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for making me so welcome today. Thank you, Ron and Brandy. Thank you, Graham, for your phenomenal and educational talk. It's been amazing. And thank you on an individual basis for all of you for the warmth and kindness that you've shown me. I've never felt more relaxed to be in a tent on a camping chair beneath an illuminated fish in front of a pagan altar. And let me tell you, this isn't the first time. Daniel, I think for me, when I'm listening to you and Graham, and it's what I enjoy about your films and your writing in both instances, is the ability to somewhat assuage the natural cynicism applied to mysticism by people that have taken the intellectual high ground through atheism and the political right. I'd like to congratulate you on that initially, and then I wonder how we can augment and mobilise some of these ideas. I know that this is something that you focus on in your films and writing, but it would be good to hear you say it in a tent.
Well, I mean, I feel like I've tried every frigging way I can to augment the ideas and get them out to people. You know, but people obviously speak in different registers. I mean, I've had some of, you know, the work for my book like influence different rock musicians. You know, like the band MGMT were listening to reading my book when they wrote their first album and kind of incorporate. You know, so it's like you don't know how that influence is going to get conveyed. It happens in a lot of different ways. You know, I mean, for me, it's you know, creating an alternative media system, but then also getting into the mainstream media, you know, as much as humanly possible, and taking every opportunity to kind of raise awareness or awaken people to the situation. And yeah, I mean, I feel like that cynicism is something that you know, is part of the media production of a certain type of subjectivity or consciousness that you know, is passive, disempowered, cynical, fatalistic, pessimistic. But you know, the world, you know, that's not from my perspective an objective way of looking at the world. I mean, you know, our bodies are 70 trillion cells meshed together. Each cell contains, you know, a genetic code that if you were to, you know, pull it apart, it would stretch from like here to the moon or something like that. You know, so it's so incredibly, extravagantly implausible that we're here in these bodies, that why not, you know, see that as the most awesome mythological constructs?
Bloody hell. Yes, I suppose I'm qualified to some degree to speak about the nature of contemporary media, as that's where I currently work. And I think that a lot of the attitudes that you describe are inherent, that there is, like the cynicism that I mentioned in my first question is pervasive, that people, I think, have been beyond trained, coded to not anticipate change, to think that change is implausible, like sort of almost weaned off, that had the revolution bred out of us. You know, like there's sort of like, I've spent time in like media institutions like sort of MTV, E-channel, and the kind of sort of luminous phosphorescent vacuity that succeeds there, like sort of the glowing treasured orbs of emptiness to which our eyes are drawn. What though is I find difficult, Daniel, is that there is a certain immediacy to you know a line of coke or a blowjob that isn't available through, like, you know, the shamanic endeavours that you and Graham speak.
Try DMT. We'll talk after that.
Yeah, just that there is just openly endorsing drugs to a recovering drug addict. Just openly. Because that's another one of the things that sort of like, sort of the thing for me is like, I suppose like, one returns, I suppose, to these kind of maxims, these rather simplistic maxims, be the change you want to see in your world, be the change you want to see in the world, because, what canvas have we but the self for these kind of explorations ultimately? So like, is that what you would urge, that people initially on an individual basis seek these kind of changes?
Yeah, I mean, catchphrases are, useful, but then also become kind of empty. Right, exactly. I can be the change you want to see the world comes from Gandhi. I actually made the mistake. I actually made the mistake of starting to reread a bunch of Gandhi, and it was kind of traumatic because he's so clearly, unbelievably amazing. And the stuff that he is suggesting is so, profoundly opposite from what is happening in our world today.
Really?
Sure. I mean, he says that the, like the purpose of civilization, in a way, should be to make life simpler.
Yeah. Like they're meant to be our trusted servants, like police and government officials. That ain't the feeling I get when I'm walking around. Like I sort of feel like that you should be able, with police cars, you should be able to ask them to give you a lift home. If you like. Whenever that's happened to me, it's had negative consequences.
And he also thinks that, like voluntary renunciation is kind of the key to happiness.
Oh my God! What? Like renunciation of sex and drugs and everything?
Well, for him, pretty much everything. But I think we could maybe keep it to wealth and keep the other stuff.
That's bloody convenient. Yeah, well, this is the thing, is that this is what I feel, sort of as, I suppose it doesn't take an incredible amount of analysis to reveal that our primary desires are incessantly stimulated to keep us basic consumers. Our basic fundamental desires are overly stimulated. The problems that we had, like recently in London, I think, a friend of mine said, you have a generation of people that have been accidentally marketed to. Because marketing is all pervasive, they're getting marketed products that they can't afford, can't ever hope to acquire. They believe the only way that they're going to achieve happiness is with the acquisition of these products that they can't afford. They see them out there, they see people living that lifestyle, they have that lifestyle beamed incessantly into their minds through media, which I participate in, and it's creating this. That was fascinating for me, Daniel, about the recent riots in London, is that it was the nihilism. That it was about nothing. This was not Paris, this is not Prague 1968, this is not people sort of rising up against the tyranny that they should be rejecting, but just sort of like, oh, fucking hell, give me an Xbox. Yeah. Just like a sort of like a knee-jerk, antipathetic, because there's no hope, there's no, and like what you're talking about when you're saying change the paradigm, how do we go about that? How do we sort of say, right, well, we've got these institutions of media, we've got these financial institutions, we have the means of distribution, we have the means of production, we have all these Marxist maxims in place, we have the fundamentals and structure. How do we alter the consciousness, the fundamental unifying field? How do we influence change on that level to alter the world?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thanks.
Made it up. Well, I think we would have to, make an alliance of people who are reaching this level of understanding and actually utilize some of the techniques of propaganda and marketing, but turn them around. Maybe the same instruments and tools that have been used to keep people in slavery and ignorance could also be used potentially to liberate and awaken them.
Yes.
Okay, that's part of it, and then I think another part of it is you need to have and this is what we've been experimenting with in Evolver, but on a very, very small scale, is there needs to be a civil society rebuilding process. Because you need to have a really awesome model of what the alternative is. That's part of the problem. Like, we haven't had a good model. Like, communism, leads nowhere. We don't have an alternative vision of what would be an incredibly awesome situation.
Yes, because we're deliberately and relentlessly denied that opportunity, and I think what Graham was saying earlier about I'm a recovering drug addict, so it's not a subject that I take lightly, but I do agree that the criminalisation of narcotics is the deliberate inhibition of human consciousness. because they seem happy enough to release crack in impoverished areas when it helps them. You know, that goes on when required. But so which leads you onto a sort of a kind of a niche question. Me, as a person that has, I've got to be really careful around drugs. And then I see like you and Graham talking, I'm like, fucking hell, I want in. And I remember sort of like the stuff like, when I took acid as a kid, like in the most ridiculous and unsafe situations in Essex, like with idiots, like people that fight, like it was like walking across Tower Bridge and it's dragon-like mouth turning against me, the old ancient rippling river, terrifying aquatic tales emerging, there be dragons, terrifying things. And I think, no, but I do still hear the sort of echo, this sort of the whisper of what was at its core transitional, beautiful access to different frequencies of consciousness. And like, and it's something that happens when I read your work and when I listen to Graham is like, I feel like I'm remembering something that I forgot. I feel like, fucking hell, I always knew that. Like, I always knew that the brain is like a radio head. That's why that band's called that. We're receiving information that's already there, the Jungian ideas. That's why mythologies all have the same archetypes. That's why, contemporary cinema tells us endlessly the same story. And lazy script writing, let's be honest. I feel that the answers are around us. Have it. Don't be back. We should use acoustics.
Right. So I mean,
who designed this dome?
This is
name again.
Buckminster Fuller.
Buckminster Fuller.
So it's a very complicated question, because I know when somebody's gotten off the drugs and there are these destructive and horrible influences, the idea to think about it in another level, in a more sophisticated way, is dangerous,
Yeah.
And so obviously I don't really advocate for psychedelics. I don't think anybody needs to do them or has to do them. For me, they were the only way I could have cracked open, my own spirit in a way.
Do the book title.
However, I do think that if you were to be scrupulous and research into it, you would find that certain types of natural psychedelics have, if anything, anti-addictive properties, and all of the evidence really points towards that. But you have the people who are running these drug rehab situations, they've demonized all the drugs, and maybe it's even a part of that archonic deception that Graham was talking about. Because what I also, as I told you before, I think a lot of people who, were addicts are actually people who had that strong innate need to experience non-ordinary states of consciousness. Yeah. But because our society has turned it into just, this destructive, culture of these horrible drugs that nullify you, they have that experience in a negative way, and then they lose that capacity forever, to have it in a positive way.
I understand. Graham was very keen to say something.
Can I say something on that as well? Which is that, in an Orwellian sense, I mean, the use of language around drugs is really important. So we find that it's increasingly difficult in our society to find the word drug not connected to the word abuse. The notion of a responsible use of drugs is kind of written out in the language of our culture. And secondly, the word drug itself carries a huge amount of emotional baggage, and it plays into a system which wants to persuade us that all of these things are the same, whereas in fact all of these things are not the same. They're very, very, very different indeed. A DMT experience is not to be compared with a heroin experience, and is not in any sense the same. And as Daniel rightly pointed out, the hallucinogenic agents are themselves highly effective agents for removing people from dependence on drugs.
Yes.
So I think the language itself muddies and confuses our thinking in these matters. But ultimately, just plain logic says that the war on drugs does not work.
Evidently.
It absolutely does not work, because we have this highly addictive legal drug called tobacco, which has never resulted in people being sent to prison, but there's been a massive reduction in its consumption simply because responsible adults looking at their own bodies have said they don't want to do that to themselves.
And a lot of the others keep dying.
Yeah,
Their customers die.
Their customers die
of the product.
Whereas most of the so-called illegal drugs have vastly increased in use, despite billions of dollars being spent suppressing. And I believe 750,000 Americans are arrested every year for possession of cannabis. I mean, that's 750 lives damaged by that arrest process. It's crazy system. So these are different agents, and it's playing into the system that the hallucinogens are grouped together with addictive drugs, which they are not. But addictive or not, it's our responsibility as adults to make decisions, and it's not the state's right to do that, in my view.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I think that those of us, and I'm not alone in this room in suffering from addiction, I think we have a different responsibility, because
you were actually curious, how many people here are in recovery from some kind of substance abuse problem?
Yeah, so for us I think it's like a different issue, because like, you know, like, because I immediately think, oh yeah, I'd fucking love to do that DMT, but I need some smack for the come down. And I'm not doing that come down without any gear. That's like just the way I sort of build like, my thinking process around that. I probably would never come back.
There is no come down.
Yeah. There is no come down. Yeah. Well, best to take the smack anyway, Graham. Daniel, I'm dead interested in this stuff. You know that Inamoto dude who meditates love at droplets of water, then instantaneously freezes them and they go into all magical crystals, so then he meditates hate, which is evil, an evil thing to do to a droplet of water, and it comes out all refracted and nasty. It's sort of almost as evidence that you can transmit energy, consciousness does affect matter. That's very interesting. And Ron mentioned an experiment. I'd work with David Lynch, Transcendental Meditation Foundation. Oh, I said that real quick, didn't I? And what that experiment was, they got 2,000 people to meditate in Chicago, and it affected the crime rates there, and that sort of number crunching machine thing you said there. It would be nice to see a positive example of that, but there clearly is a relationship between consciousness and the physical that we're on the precipice of illuminating and discovering. One of the things I really enjoyed in your book, mate, was that bit about the behaviour of electrons changing when they're observed and not observed. That's mind-blowing. Like this is like, I don't know if I'm the best person in the world to explain this, but I'm bloody well going to try. And if it goes wrong, you snatch the conch. They fired electrons through a tiny slit. The electrons then left a pattern, like the shadow almost of the slit on a panel behind it. They then thought, oh well, if firing electrons through one slit creates one line, if we fire it through two slits, that would be two lines. But it created 5 lines, didn't it? They said, well, perhaps they're bouncing off each other and creating waves as they travel through these two slits. How is this done? We'll observe these electrons. So they built some sort of tiny electron camera. God knows how little that would be. Micro technology, damn clever, these Japanese. So they observed it, and then under observation, the electrons behaved differently. They went back to going through the slits just in parallel. There were suddenly just 2 slits. The electrons were affected by the process of observation, and I know that's a scientific creed, that the very process of observation affects the outcome of the experiment, but to see it so literally and quantumly demonstrated, that's almost the presence of God, ain't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, my personal metaphysical belief is Vedanta, which is that ultimately there's a singular consciousness. It's like a Hindu metaphysics that basically we're all, we were talking about this last night, right? That basically we're all kind of characters in a play that consciousness is putting on to discover its own creative capacities. So yeah.
Bloody cheek.
Yeah.
What's it doing that for? I've been taking this seriously.
Emery?
So my question for you guys is, what comes after time? Like, as we go through the shift, how do we see time differently?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I've been waiting to tell people my theory on what comes after time for longer than I can remember. Because time says, I think the finest mind since time began cannot answer those kind of questions, because it exists beyond the psychological paradigm and linguistic system that we operate within.
So what system does it operate in?
Well, I don't know. It's beyond our consciousness. We get glimpses of it, you know, between the infrared and ultraviolet, the narrow corridor of light that we are able to perceive, the tiny frequency that was brilliantly illuminated by Graham, through which we receive all our wisdom. We get a tiny fragment. We don't need to know what goes on beyond time. We need to know how to save this planet that we live on, to align our consciousness with the fundamental frequency from which all life comes, that Daniel just referred to, and to generate love and unity between us. These are esoteric questions. Wonderful question, but I think they don't help us to solve the problems that are confronting our planet.
Actually, I disagree, because I'm just like really rational.
Hold on a second. I will fight you!
I think you're a lot bigger than me. I have like a really rational mind, kind of like, you know, I want to understand.
Well, then feed and clothe the poor.
Well, I guess, you know, beyond clock time would be kind of the synchronic order, you know.
Oh, fucking hell, Daniel knew. Why'd you make me do it first? Just spent 10 minutes. We'll have a fight later.
And, you know, I studied psychology quite a bit, and there's a huge dilemma between your neuroscientist or your neuropsychology, a cognitive science, versus a clinical psychologist. You know, you don't even want to bring up consciousness in a cognitive psychology class, but you know, in clinical psychology, it's a lot more. And then
maybe what we're going to learn is like rationality is a tool. It doesn't do everything. You know, we want to learn what the limits of that tool is. Then we're beyond those limits. Then we come up with other tools.
Yeah, because like an electron being in two places simultaneously, that is already beyond the rational. So that means that rationale has its limits. Is that what you're saying?
Kind of, yeah. And rational comes from ratio, which is measuring, and not everything can be measured in that way.
And like what Graham was saying with that thing, like that we're obsessed with one frequency of consciousness, the problem-solving realm of consciousness. It's not good for everything, eh?
And most people, you know, like he was saying, are trapped in one form of consciousness, you know, which is not what you find when you meet like people from the Kogi or the Sequoia tribe. You know, they're sort of more aware of you know, contingency, like of all these different layers of reality and possibility.
How does that manifest itself in their behaviour and the stuff they say?
I think it makes them, you know, a little bit lighter and a little bit sort of, almost a little bit more cooler and a little more impersonal than we are.
Impersonal, like they're not attached to themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just read this book, but it just basically says if you change the future, you change the outcome of reality now. Does anybody know anything about it?
I've seen Back to the Future, and what you must not do is fuck your mum. However much she comes on to you, just get Biff off of her, and then go back to the dock.
I mean, I recently visited the Kogis. I'm still integrating a lot of like what they said, and they said that one of the kind of things that humans are meant to do is to make payments to the earth through ritual, and that we have to sort of give back to the earth, you know, through you know, conscious application of these kind of ritual technologies. And so they were teaching us some. One of them was very simple. It involved like taking these little cotton balls and, you know, kind of imagining there were all of the minerals and all of the food and all of the water of the earth, and then you would kind of give them to the Kogi and they would bury them. So somehow like rebuilding a kind of reciprocal and conscious relationship with the planet. And then beyond that is everything that we've been discussing through Evolver, which is like how do we, you know, reinvent community, how do we create communities that are, you know, relatively self-sufficient and resilient, and kind of undo all of the stuff that, you know, the last centuries, the effort of capitalism has been to take all of the things that were human relations and turn them into monetary exchanges. You know, so people used to make their own clothes, now they buy clothes. You know, people used to take care of their own kids, now they pay other people to do it. You know, and that was because, you know, capitalism requires more and more things being turned into money, being turned into profit. You know, but that's kind of now reached its absurd limit where there's nothing left to turn into money. You know, so at that point the capitalist system is breaking down, and I think what we're going to ultimately recognize is that capitalism was a transitional and immature system, but it's, you know, got the planet to be globalized, and now something else has to emerge. So we have to be the ones, we can't wait around, nobody else is going to do it for us. We have to be the ones who create that new emergent system.
Is it only through ritual and respect that we can build our relationship with the earth, do you think, Daniel?
It's a great question.
Thank you.
I thought so.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be learned from indigenous practices, and I think that's, like, for me, like, what's been very exciting with Evolvers. Now we're doing retreats to work with these elders from the Sequoia tribe, and now the Kogi, and soon the Kashinawa in Brazil, and I look forward to those becoming, longer relationships where we can actually have some of people from our world, what they call the younger brother world, the Kogi calls the younger brother, actually regaining some of those traditions, and then we'll figure out how to mediate them into our world. I mean, they won't take exactly the same form, but yeah, I don't know. I think maybe having some types of rituals are a good thing. It's not very common to my nature, but I'm up for it as a challenge. Huh.
One thing I've been kind of trying to think about, like, I is thinking about everything is like a sacred ritual, like how we kind of have to smile through our teeth when we're cleaning or cooking or doing something that's been looked at as really mundane or like almost embarrassing as like a profession or something that we have to do. This lifestyle of like drive-through and convenience, whenever we could relook at everything as being really sacred and a ritual of
I mean, there's a theory.
Beauty and creativity. There's
a theory that, like, the Maya, for instance, didn't use the wheel when they built their huge structures, like the pyramids of Palenque and stuff like that. And the kids would have toys with wheels, so they actually knew about the wheel. So they chose not to make their lives easier when they were building these structures, which meant they must have taken a lot longer to create and was much more inconvenient. But perhaps they saw that labor as a sacred task. And that actually, extending it or prolonging it was actually part of the beauty of bringing something magnificent into creation.
I've just had a thought, like, that Inamoto idea of, like, he meditates love and the droplets of water, they freeze in these magnificent, beautiful patterns as if somehow representing that love. And then, the negative has the obvious and contrary effect. Perhaps the Mayans, and this is obviously just off the top of my head, mate, but perhaps, like, through neglecting to facilitate an easier, more functional method, they was almost as if the energy of their toil would be represented in the monuments themselves, as if somehow it's recorded, like the notion of character, like, I come from England, so it's all like, we talk about like druid culture and ley lines, like the land itself has characteristics, like, and like in London there is a place, for example, Centre Point. Centre Point was prior to being Centre Point, Centre Point is where if you're a junkie, it's the last place you go to score. You'll get a bad deal, it'll be bad gear, it'll be awful. Before, but you go there anyway out of sheer desperation. The front line, they call it, just under there at the Tottenham Court Road, central London. Before they built that building as a regeneration scheme. Before that, but like they keep trying to regenerate this part of London. Hogarth's depictions of Mother's Ruin, and the painter, the illustrator Hogarth, he did like sort of when gin was introduced from, I think, Holland to the United Kingdom, it was the crack of its day and sent everyone all daft and mad. And but it doesn't matter how they try and regenerate. Where Gin Alley was depicted is the exact place where Centre Point now is. It's as if the land itself has some character. And perhaps in a land devoid of ritual, a land devoid of a process of relationship between the psyche, the spirit and the land, that we develop this malevolent relationship with our planet, this toxic relationship. So perhaps the Mayans, through not using the wheel, through not making that process easier, were thinking that their toil would be, or perhaps knew rather than thought, that their toil would be represented, their endeavour would be as much part of the structure as the very bricks themselves.
That was awesome. Yeah, I mean, and then also you could think about, like, Gurdjieff is a philosopher, mystic, who talked about intentional suffering and conscious labor as being ways to kind of advance yourself, into higher levels of consciousness or levels of being. But then also you have maybe infliction of unconscious suffering as an occult ritual. Like 9/11, in a way, could be seen as like a massive occult ceremony that used human sacrifice to fix consciousness at a certain frequency or level.
Enacted by whom in that example?
David Icke's reptiles.
David Icke's reptiles. They're always going to turn up.
I just remembered one thing though on this subject, Graham, because another thing I wanted to ask you, which I think I asked you before. Did you ever look at this book, The Giza Power Plant?
Oh yes.
So, because you don't talk about that theory at all. Basically, the Giza power plant is this idea that the Great Pyramid was a energy device, and that they had a different way of creating energy, and that's actually, they may have moved the stones of the pyramids and so on around with this energy beam that was shot out of it.
That's my friend Chris Dunn. I think the pyramid is a multifunctional object. Personally, I resist the notion that all that psychic energy was put into creating a power station. It doesn't gel with my feelings and my experiences at the Great Pyramid. On the other hand, Chris Dunn is a machine tool maker, and he absolutely knows what he's talking about, and I've got the highest respect for him, and he has drawn attention to extraordinary anomalies at Giza, and so I'm open to the possibility that the monument has actually practical economic functions as well as spiritual and psychic functions. Why should it not?
Yeah, that's what hit me, which I never thought before during the talk tonight, was that maybe it was both a psychic map of the underworld and also an engineering instrument for utilizing this form of power that was somehow based on the structure of the vacuum or the structure of consciousness itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a question for Russell about the relationship between film and consciousness. It seems, when Inception came out, there was a lot of talk about how our dreams have already been so influenced by film, and I think our consciousness and the way we think of ourselves in the world and acting in the world and as agents in the world has been affected by. I was just wondering what you thought about that relationship.
I think that you can define a culture to some degree by the stories that it tells itself, by the way it sees itself. I think you can define American culture by the action heroes it pushes forward. There was a time in the 80s where America was Sylvester Stallone, then when it was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and now even in comedy, through the films of Adam Sandler, who's a colleague of mine and a friend, you see America represented as, oh well, I didn't mean to, kind of sorry, kind of a character, I think, obviously the relationship between films and dreams is well documented. Some people say that the cycle of a dream is like 90 minutes long. I'm conscious in this environment. Normally I get away with this shit because I'm not surrounded by people who know more than me. When you sort of think, oh, fucking no one's going to know, I'll just say what I like. That's a dream cycle. Yes, that's right. Nearly. Right, so most movies are around that length because it appeals to us. That's how we like to receive that kind of information. So sort of on a functional level, there's a clear corollary between the nature of dreams and the nature of a film. And also, through Jungian analysis and the kind of archetypes and the way that films and stories are structured, there is a further corollary. I suppose, from the perspective that we're analysing things this evening, I suppose that what films and entertainment and media generally, the function they serve is, as the veil of Maya, to keep us spellbound, to keep us passive consumers, to negate and castrate the civic duty to which Daniel consistently refers, to keep us as citizens that don't participate in our culture, but are just independent cells of consumption, sort of glutting on life like larvae till we pop.
It seems like you get behind a lot of these ideas, and you seem, very in tune with it. I'm wondering if you feel the need, to go beyond here and have the urge to use your medium to spread some of these ideas.
Yeah, you could be like Jesus or something like that.
Oh, that never occurred to me. It's not like I spent every day from the age of 14 wondering if I was. Like all boys. Really?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, all boys, they go through a stage of thinking they're Jesus. I just dragged it out for several decades. Of course, I think that nothing, as Oscar Wilde said, nothing can be truly beautiful if it has no function. So what is the point in making art that has no message, telling stories that have no value, that serve no function for us? And I'm aware that the position I'm in culturally could be better used, and in fact I've long been disenchanted with the nature of the way. It's real frustrating to work in media. It's not working in a coal mine, I accept. I've been poor, so I know what that's like too. So I'm not just coming from the perspective of, oh God, I just don't know what to do with all this bloody paper. No, I do feel like Yeah, I feel a huge obligation, and not necessarily because I think, oh, the glimmering light of my celebrity. No, I think because of being a human being, it's pointless to do otherwise. Because I'm aware that enlightenment, whilst it's something that must be striven for, is also ever present. How could it be otherwise? You can't build it in your head out of Lego. It's already there. You know, so like I feel that why I don't want to waste my life in case the research that Graham alluded to was incorrect, and there is a reincarnation, and this is my only chance. I don't want to think, well, I was in forgetting Sarah Marshall.
I have a question about the spirits of the dead affecting the living, specifically Russell. How do you sincerely believe or see the spirit of Amy Winehouse still affecting the living now?
Well, I think like Amy, sort of, in a secular age, we are godless, officially. Like Nietzsche killed God, and of course the famous phrase that the fear is that without God, man won't believe in nothing or believe in anything. So celebrity suddenly occupies this incredibly important space, this new pantheon of disposable, transient deities. Amy was different in that she, in the somewhat limited terms of jazz music, was a genius, I believe, and but then also a drug addict, and but I think sort of like the archetype of the damned woman is one that the media currently rather enjoys, whether it is Lady Diana, an iconic figure in many forms, the virgin, the whore, the damned woman, finally the martyr. So I think that the way that Amy Winehouse is used figuratively, post-structurally, the way her icon is used to demonstrate different ideas. I mean, I think she was a great artist. I knew her. She was a mate. She was just a brilliant singer, a very bright kid, and a very sick girl who had a massive drug problem.
I wanted to actually just say one other thing on that issue. If you look at cultures like African tribal cultures or the Maya, they believe that the spirits of the dead, if they're not treated properly, with ritual and with respect and somehow, ceremonially, worked with, come back and afflict the living as complexes like neuroses and depressions and suicidal tendencies and so on. For me, somebody like that is reflecting on our, inability to understand the spiritual dimension of being and how it operates in all of its levels.
As it's rattling around in our own brains,
because maybe the problem that she was facing was a spiritual crisis also, and the lack of ritual and even a form for a kind of respect or deeper understanding. Maybe it's a mistake from my perspective. I always feel like whenever something seems a little bit imposed, I begin to shirk away from it. And that's just a problem that maybe, and for me, I feel very like when I visited like the Kogi, I felt super safe, because their practices are so deeply embedded in a tradition, and just meeting them, I felt their like dignity and gravity. Maybe there's something I haven't stepped into there myself, where it should be like, yes, you may be right, I got to think about that. I'm interested in Jose Arguelles had this whole idea of these rainbow bridge meditations to bring about the constitution of the noosphere through, he believed we could actually make rainbows appear across the sky on a certain day if everybody, I guess part of it is there's so many of these different things too, like somebody has their unity meditation, somebody else has their rainbow bridge meditation, and none of them seem to come from like a deep tradition, so it's like we can do something and make something up, and maybe that's great. Like with the Kogi stuff, it was very, very specific. They taught me some of the stuff, but I couldn't teach it to anybody else. I wasn't allowed to do that. And if I did it wrong, I wouldn't have the desired effect. So from their perspective. So I don't know. This stuff is kind of complicated, and to bring in ritual and meditation. I don't know what the process is that one goes through in a loose knit, still kind of self-developing, community such as this one, to make those the absolutely right techniques and practices. So I admit to you that I have a certain area of ambiguity and confusion there.
It really feels simple to me that we can track all the problems that we face in the world right now to basically a schism between our consciousness on an individual and a collective level with the universal holographic interconnected unity. So the question arises, how do we most efficiently heal that schism and reharmonize ourselves with the natural order of all living systems?
Well, for me, that idea that I really still quite like is this December 21st, 2012, try to get a global moment of collective reflection as a way to kind of bring about an uptick in human consciousness.
It does affect how we think, how we act. So on your take, how do you see media affecting our conscience?
I'd say reappropriate the sort of successful ideas that are already in place. As Daniel said, the sort of I'm really into that idea. I'll be passing that off as my own tomorrow. But like the industry is like the nascent organs are in place, right? So like okay, yeah, evidently media, the nature of advertising is testimony enough to the power of media. But perhaps instead of telling people, if you drink a can of Coke, you'll feel sexy. Tell people that if you meditate, you'll feel connected with your ultimate destiny as a spiritual being that is only distinguished and distinct and separate from the earth by subjectivity incessantly imposed. So I suppose you use the machinery of the...
How do we affect the machinery, though?
Just turn up on the fucking telly and start saying stuff.
Michael, this is one last question. You have a question?
Well, I feel like I have a response to Brandy, because I would say that I've been teaching graphic design at Parsons School of Design and traveling around the world to different universities. And basically it's teaching the people that become the wizards of the symbols, the images, and the stories, really teaching them responsibility of their power and to actually bring them to a place where they recognize themselves as multi-dimensional beings, working between 1, 2, and 3D space, using 4D dimensional access through internet tools like the internet is the gateway drug to like multi-dimensional consciousness. What I've noticed with suddenly the waking up of the artists who are starting to be taken seriously by the culture again. So I see we need to give them the latitude to make new stories and be multidimensional people. I don't know. That's just my take on it.
One last little question. It's just a quick question.
Yeah.
No more statements.
Is Quetzalcoatl the white flying dragon beast from Neverending Story?
He was never going to say something normal, that geezer. As soon as he stood up, well, this is going to be jokes.
All right, cool. Maybe that's the right note on which to come to a conclusion.
What's the answer?
Leave it open.
Maybe.
Okay, thank you, folks. That was awesome.
Thanks, guys.